In the high deserts of Utah, the most efficient killer doesn't have claws, it has a heartbeat made of mud. 10 miles away, a thunderstorm has dropped 2 inches of rain in minutes, sending a 30-foot wall of liquid concrete screaming through the Devil's Throat Canyon at 40 miles per hour. For 24-year-old Maya, the exit is a half-mile away. The water is 60 seconds away. And the canyon is only 3 feet wide. The Red Tide, the pitbull who dug through a mountain. Chapter 1: The Blue Sky Trap. The slot canyons of southern Utah are geological masterpieces, narrow corridors of swirling orange and red sandstone carved by millions of years of patient water. To a hiker, they feel like sacred spaces, where the sun filters down in ethereal shafts of light and the silence is absolute. But this beauty is a deceptive mask for one of the most efficient killing machines on the planet. Maya, a 24-year-old solo hiker, had spent the morning navigating the Devil's Throat, a slot canyon so narrow in places that she had to turn sideways to pass. Above her, the sky was a perfect, taunting shade of cobalt blue. There wasn't a cloud in sight, and the desert air was bone dry. It felt like the safest place on Earth, a subterranean sanctuary far from the chaos of the city. By her side was Hulk, a 90-pound Blue Nose Pitbull with a chest like a barrel and scars on his legs from a previous life in a fighting ring. Maya had rescued him 3 years ago, seeing the gentle soul beneath the dangerous breed label. Hulk didn't care for the scenery, he cared for the vibration. He moved with a low, heavy gait, his paws constantly testing the density of the sand. In the high deserts of Utah, the most efficient killer doesn't have claws, it has a heartbeat made of mud. 10 miles away, a thunderstorm has dropped 2 inches of rain in minutes, sending a 30-foot wall of liquid concrete screaming through the Devil's Throat Canyon at 40 miles per hour. For 24-year-old Maya, the exit is a half-mile away. The water is 60 seconds away. And the canyon is only 3 feet wide. The Red Tide, the pitbull who dug through a mountain. Chapter 1: The Blue Sky Trap. The slot canyons of southern Utah are geological masterpieces, narrow corridors of swirling orange and red sandstone carved by millions of years of patient water. To a hiker, they feel like sacred spaces, where the sun filters down in ethereal shafts of light and the silence is absolute. But this beauty is a deceptive mask for one of the most efficient killing machines on the planet. Maya, a 24-year-old solo hiker, had spent the morning navigating the Devil's Throat, a slot canyon so narrow in places that she had to turn sideways to pass. Above her, the sky was a perfect, taunting shade of cobalt blue. There wasn't a cloud in sight, and the desert air was bone dry. It felt like the safest place on Earth, a subterranean sanctuary far from the chaos of the city. By her side was Hulk, a 90-pound Blue Nose Pitbull with a chest like a barrel and scars on his legs from a previous life in a fighting ring. Maya had rescued him 3 years ago, seeing the gentle soul beneath the dangerous breed label. Hulk didn't care for the scenery, he cared for the vibration. He moved with a low, heavy gait, his paws constantly testing the density of the sand. 10 miles to the north, a localized monsoon cell had stalled over a high plateau. In 20 minutes, 2 inches of rain fell onto the baked, non-absorbent slick rock. Because the desert floor cannot soak up water that fast, the runoff began to gather, funneling into the dry washes and gaining speed. It was no longer rain, it was a kinetic weapon, a hydraulic ram searching for a path downward. Hulk stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't bark, he tilted his head, his ears pinning back against his skull. He felt it through his pads before Maya heard it, a low-frequency thrumming that vibrated the very marrow of his bones. To Hulk, the earth was suddenly growling. He looked back at the bend they had just turned, his pupils dilating as the barometric pressure shifted violently. Maya checked her watch, confused by Hulk's sudden tension. "What is it, boy?" "Just a plane." But as she spoke, the birds that had been nesting in the canyon walls suddenly erupted in a panicked cloud of wings. The silence of the canyon was replaced by a distant, rhythmic thumping, like a freight train derailment moving toward them at 40 miles per hour. Hulk didn't wait for a command. He lunged forward, grabbing Maya's heavy hydration pack in his massive jaws. He wasn't playing, he was herding her. He pulled with such force that Maya stumbled, forcing her toward a small, jagged outcrop of rock, a high shelf 12 feet above the canyon floor. It was a tiny ledge, barely wide enough for a human to sit on. "Hulk, stop!" Maya yelled, but then she smelled it. The air was suddenly filled with the scent of wet dust, ancient rotted wood, and ozone. The thumping became a roar that shook the sandstone walls. She looked down the corridor and saw it, a 30-foot wall of churning red mud, uprooted juniper trees, and jagged boulders. The red tide had arrived. Chapter 2: The Red Tide. A flash flood in a slot canyon isn't just water, it is a liquid landslide. It carries the weight of thousands of tons of debris, acting like a giant piece of sandpaper that grinds everything in its path. As the wall of water hit the bend, the sound was deafening, a physical pressure that squeezed the air out of Maya's lungs. She scrambled onto the ledge, her fingers bleeding as she clawed at the stone. Hulk leaped up after her, his powerful hind legs propelling his 90-pound frame onto the slick shelf just as the water hit. The canyon floor vanished beneath a churning, violent slurry. The water rose with terrifying speed, 5 feet, 10 feet, 15. It hissed and boiled, the spray soaking Maya to the bone. The ledge, which had felt high a moment ago, was now only inches above the surface. Maya watched in horror as a full-sized cottonwood tree was swept past, its branches snapping like toothpicks against the canyon walls. The power was absolute. If she fell in, her bones would be pulverized by the boulders tumbling along the bottom. She huddled against the cold sandstone, her arms wrapped around Hulk's thick neck, feeling the dog's heart racing against her chest. The water was a thick, opaque red, the color of raw sienna. It looked like the earth itself was bleeding. Hulk stood like a gargoyle on the ledge, his low center of gravity keeping them anchored. Every time a large piece of debris struck the rock beneath them, the shelf vibrated, threatening to shear off and join the flood. Hulk let out a low, defiant growl at the water. This was the peak surge, the moment where the most volume was moving through the narrow space. Maya realized that the blue sky above was a cruel joke. Somewhere miles away, the sun was shining, but here, she was in the throat of a monster. She prayed the ledge would hold, her eyes fixed on the water level as it began to lap at her boots. Hulk shifted his weight, pushing Maya further back into a small crevice in the wall. He was acting as a physical shield, his wide body taking the brunt of the icy spray. Pitbulls are often criticized for their gameness, but in this moment, the relentless refusal to quit was the only thing keeping Maya from sliding off into the abyss. Suddenly, a massive surge of mud hit the shelf. The sandstone, weakened by the internal pressure of the flood, let out a sickening crack. The ledge didn't fall into the water, it tilted forward, dumping Maya and Hulk into the receding but still violent tail end of the flood. Maya let out a scream that was immediately swallowed by the roar of the red tide. The water had begun to drop, but it was replaced by something more sinister, quick silt. The flood had slowed down, depositing feet of heavy, liquid mud that began to thicken instantly. Maya was tumbled through the muck, her limbs entangled in debris, until she came to a halt. She wasn't drowning anymore, but she was trapped in a substance that felt like wet concrete. Chapter 3: The Silt Tomb. The flood was over as quickly as it had begun, leaving a haunting silence in its wake. But the canyon was transformed. The floor was now 6 feet higher than it had been, covered in a thick, cooling slurry of red silt. Maya was buried to her waist, her legs pinned by the immense weight of the mud. She tried to pull herself out, but the suction was absolute. Every movement she made only caused her to sink deeper. The physics of quicksilт are brutal. The more you struggle, the more the particles pack together, creating a vacuum that can exert thousands of pounds of pressure. Maya could feel the silt squeezing her thighs, cutting off the circulation. She was being cold-cooked by the earth, her body becoming a permanent part of the canyon. The sun began to beat down into the slot again, its rays hitting the wet mud. In the desert heat, the silt would begin to bake and harden within the hour. Maya realized with a jolt of pure terror that she wasn't just stuck, she was being entombed. If she wasn't extracted soon, the mud would set like a brick, crushing her internal organs and suffocating her through her skin. "Hulk," she cried out, her voice echoing off the red walls. "Hulk, where are you?" For a long minute, there was no answer. She looked downstream, seeing only a tangled mess of broken trees and red sludge. The silence was suffocating. She was alone in a stone throat, a half-mile from the exit, with a mountain of mud slowly solidifying around her. Then, 50 yards away, a mound of red mud began to move. Hulk's head emerged from the debris, looking like a clay statue. He had been washed further down, pinned against a bend in the canyon. He shook his head, sending a spray of red silt in every direction, his one good eye, the other scarred from his past, searching the corridor for his owner. When he saw Maya, Hulk didn't whine or pace. He engaged his working mode. He knew that the mud was the enemy. He began to plow toward her, his massive chest acting like a prow of a ship. He was exhausted, his muscles likely bruised by the boulders in the water, but his bait dog ancestry had given him a threshold for pain that was almost supernatural. He reached Maya, but he couldn't get close enough to pull her. The mud around her was a liquefaction zone, turning to soup if he stepped on it. He stood on a semi-solid piece of driftwood, his breathing heavy and ragged. He looked at Maya's pale face, then at the mud that was slowly rising toward her ribs as she continued to settle. Hulk realized that digging with his paws wasn't going to work, the mud just flowed back into the hole. He needed to change the density of the silt. He began to use his snout like a shovel, pushing aside the heavier stones and debris to create a channel. He was an 80-pound engine of muscle, and he was about to start a war with the geology of Utah. Chapter 4: The Relentless Engine. Hulk began to dig with a mechanical, tireless rhythm. He wasn't just scratching at the surface, he was throwing hundreds of pounds of wet silt behind him with every lunge of his shoulders. His blue nose was raw and bleeding from the abrasive sand, but he didn't stop. He was a gainless machine, a dog that had been bred for the hold, and now he was holding on to Maya's life. Maya watched in awe as the pitbull cleared the first 2 feet of mud from around her torso. She could feel the pressure on her ribs ease slightly, but her legs were still locked in the deep silt. The sun was getting higher, and the mud was becoming tackier, stickier. "It's hardening, Hulk!" "Faster," she urged, her voice cracking with exhaustion. Hulk's muscles were visibly trembling. To move that much weight in the desert heat is an incredible metabolic feat. His coat was matted with red clay, and his tongue was parched, but he refused to seek shade. He was a bait dog who had once survived a ring of monsters. A little bit of Utah mud wasn't going to break him. He was the relentless engine. He reached a layer of compacted debris, a tangle of roots and branches that had been buried under the silt. This was the lock that was holding Maya in place. Hulk didn't have the paws to untangle it, so he used his greatest weapon, his jaw. He reached into the mud, biting down on a thick juniper branch that was pinned against Maya's hip, and began to pull. The pitbull lock is a myth of bone structure, but a reality of psychology. Once Hulk bit down, his brain simply switched off the option to let go. He planted his back legs against a solid rock wall and arched his back, his neck muscles bulging. He was trying to pull a tree out of a mountain of wet concrete. The branch groaned, then snapped with a sharp crack. Maya felt a sudden shift in the pressure. One of her legs was free, but the other was still buried deep. "Almost there, boy. Please, just one more." She was crying now, the combination of relief and terror overwhelming her. Hulk didn't look up. He repositioned himself, his paws bleeding from the sharp grit, and began to clear the last of the debris. The heat in the canyon was rising, creating a steam room effect as the moisture evaporated from the mud. The air was thick and hard to breathe. Hulk was panting heavily, his sides heaving. He was reaching the point of heat exhaustion, but his loyalty was a terminal condition. He would dig until his heart stopped before he would leave Maya in that hole. With a final, desperate shove of his chest, Hulk cleared the last of the silt from Maya's waist. He moved behind her, his head dipping beneath the mud to find the D-ring of her heavy-duty climbing harness. He bit down on the nylon strap, his teeth locking into the fabric. It was time for the great extraction, a battle of raw biological power against the suction of the earth. Chapter 5: The Jaw Lock. Hulk planted his feet and began to back up. The suction of the mud let out a low, wet hiss as it fought to keep its prize. Maya felt her body being stretched, her joints popping as Hulk applied 60 pounds of towing force. It was a slow, agonizing process. To the mud, Maya was an anchor; to Hulk, she was his world. Neither side was willing to yield. On Hulk's shoulders, they began a slow, rhythmic, crawl walk. Every step was a battle. Hulk took the brunt of Maya's weight, his powerful neck bracing against her side. They moved through the narrow slot, two figures carved out of red clay, silhouetted against the bright exit that looked like a portal to another world. The exit of the canyon was a half-mile away, but it felt like 100. They moved past the debris of the flood, the broken trees and the pulverized rocks that served as a graveyard for anything that hadn't been as lucky as they were. Hulk didn't falter. He was the exit of the damned, the guardian who was walking his owner back from the throat of the devil. Chapter 6: The Exit of the Damned. When they finally cleared the mouth of the devil's throat, the desert sun hit them with a blinding glare. Maya collapsed into the sagebrush, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked back at the narrow slit in the mountain. From the outside, it looked beautiful and serene, the red stone glowing in the afternoon light. It was impossible to tell that an hour ago it had been a churning tomb. Hulk lay down beside her, his head resting on her chest. He was finally allowing himself to rest. The red mud was drying on his fur, cracking and falling off in small flakes. He looked like an ancient statue that had come to life just long enough to perform a miracle. Maya buried her face in his neck, the scent of wet dog and desert sage the sweetest thing she had ever smelled. A group of park rangers, who had been monitoring the flash flood from a distance, spotted them through binoculars. They had been preparing a body recovery team, convinced that no one in that drainage could have survived the surge. When they saw the red clay woman and her massive dog walking out of the canyon, they scrambled down the ridge in a state of shock. "You were in there?" the lead ranger asked, looking at the water line on the canyon walls that was 20 feet high. He looked at Maya's legs, then at Hulk's raw paws and blooded snout. He didn't see a vicious breed or a fighting dog. He saw a hero. He knelt down and offered Hulk his own canteen, the dog drinking with a desperate, rhythmic lapping. Maya was evacuated to a local hospital where she was treated for crush syndrome and severe dehydration. The doctors told her that if she had been in that mud for 30 more minutes, she would have lost her legs, or her life. They asked her how she got out. Maya just pointed to the photo on her phone of Hulk, sleeping on the floor of the ranger station. Hulk's recovery took weeks. His paws were bandaged, and he was put on a high-protein diet to rebuild the muscle he had burned through in the canyon. He became a local celebrity, but he didn't care for the attention. He was just happy to be back on the porch, his head in Maya's lap, watching the horizon for any sign of a vibration. Maya never hiked a slot canyon again. She realized that some places are meant for the water, and some beauties are too dangerous to touch. She and Hulk moved to the high plains, where the horizons are wide and the ground is solid. They walk for miles in the open sun, a woman with a slight limp and a dog with blue nose scars that tell a story of a mountain moved. The red tide still flows through the devil's throat every summer, erasing the tracks of the hikers and carving the stone a little deeper. But the legend of the pitbull who dug through the silt remains. It is a story that reminds us that loyalty isn't about a breed, it's about a lock, a heart that refuses to let go, even when the earth is trying to pull you under. The desert is beautiful, but it has no mercy. Only love can dig you out of the dark. If Hulk's battle against the red tide moved your heart, help us tell the stories of the misunderstood heroes. Smash that like button to salute Hulk and every pitbull who proves that love is their true strength. Subscribe to Paws That Saved Lives, where we bring you the most thrilling and dramatic cinematic legends of nature's heroes. Comment Hulk below if you believe a dog's grip can save a soul.